The night was thick with silence, broken only by the distant hum of the city and the occasional rustle of leaves in the cold breeze. She stood there, her fingers tightening around the small pendant hanging from her neck, a reminder of everything she had lost. Across the dimly lit street, she saw him, the one man she had sworn to hate, the one responsible for shattering the life she once knew. His presence was a cruel twist of fate, and yet something in his gaze held her captive. For years, they had been on opposite sides, driven by forces beyond their control. He was the reason she had spent so many sleepless nights consumed by anger. And now, standing just a few feet away, he wasn't the monster she had imagined him to be. There was no malice in his eyes, no arrogance in his stance, only a quiet exhaustion, as if he too was tired of the war between them. She could have turned away, walked past him without a second thought. But the weight of the past was too heavy, the unanswered questions too many. Why now? Why, after everything, did their paths cross again? The air between them crackled with unspoken words, a fragile thread holding together years of resentment, and something else, something neither of them dared to name. As she struggled to find her voice, he took a step forward. "You don't have to trust me," he said, his tone calm but firm. "But I need you to listen." Her heart pounded against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to reject him, to remember the pain he had caused. But deep down, she knew this moment wasn't just about the past. It was about something bigger, something she couldn't yet understand. And then, just as she opened her mouth to respond, the distant sound of sirens shattered the silence. In an instant, the fragile moment between them was gone, replaced by the reality neither of them could escape. She didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. The sirens grew louder, their wailing echoing off the buildings, bouncing between them like a warning neither of them could ignore. She took a sharp breath, her mind racing. Was this a coincidence, or was it connected to him? To her? She didn't know, and that terrified her more than anything. He took another step closer, his voice low but urgent. "We don't have much time." She should have walked away, let him deal with whatever trouble he had brought upon himself. But something in the way he spoke, in the way his eyes darted to the shadows behind her, made her hesitate. For the first time, she noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his fists clenched at his sides like he was bracing for something. "What do you want from me?" she asked, forcing her voice to stay steady. He looked past her for a second, scanning the street as if expecting someone to emerge from the darkness. Then he met her gaze again. "Answers," he said simply. "Same as you." She wanted to argue, to tell him that she had stopped looking for answers a long time ago. But that would have been a lie. The truth was, she had never stopped. She had just learned to live with the uncertainty, the missing pieces that haunted her every night. Before she could respond, the red and blue lights flashed against the buildings, casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement. He exhaled sharply. "We need to move." She had no reason to go with him, no reason to trust him. And yet, as the sound of car doors slamming filled the air, she found herself making a choice she never thought she would. She turned on her heel and walked away, not toward safety, but toward him. Neither of them spoke as they slipped into a side alley, their footsteps quiet against the damp pavement. The air smelled of rain and asphalt, and the distant hum of the city carried on, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But everything about this moment was far from ordinary. He led the way, moving quickly but carefully, his body tense like he expected an ambush at any second. She followed, her mind torn between 100 different thoughts. She didn't even know where they were going, only that something about this felt inevitable. After several blocks, he finally stopped in the shadow of an old brick building. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "This isn't just about you," he said quietly. "Or me." She crossed her arms, trying to ignore the way her pulse refused to slow. "Then what is it about?" For a long moment, he just looked at her, as if debating whether he should tell her the truth. Then, finally, he spoke. "You were never supposed to find out," he said. "But now that you have, they won't stop until—" A noise cut him off. A soft shuffle, barely audible, but enough to send a jolt of alarm through both of them. She didn't see where it came from, but she felt the shift in the air. Someone else was here, watching. And just like that, she realized whatever this was, it was far bigger than either of them had imagined. That's just a snippet of how the story can continue. Writing 10,000 words is a big project, but I can keep adding more in chunks. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. The sound was subtle, almost too quiet to notice, but it sent a chill down her spine. Her breath hitched as she exchanged a glance with him, his expression shifting from tension to something even darker, an understanding that whatever they had just walked into was far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. He reached for her wrist, his grip firm but not forceful, and guided her further into the shadows of the narrow alley. The city's noise felt distant now, drowned out by the rush of blood in her ears. They moved quickly, slipping through back streets and side paths, avoiding the main roads. She wasn't even sure when she had stopped resisting, when she had started trusting his instincts over her own. Maybe it was the way he moved, not with reckless desperation, but with purpose, as if he had done this before. Or maybe it was the simple fact that despite everything, she knew he wasn't lying. After what felt like hours, they reached a quiet stretch of abandoned buildings, their windows shattered, their walls covered in faded graffiti. He finally let go of her wrist and turned to face her, his eyes scanning the street one last time before he spoke. "They're not after just me," he said, his voice low. "They're after anyone who knows too much." Her stomach tightened. "And what is it that I'm supposed to know?" His jaw clenched. "More than you think." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. This didn't make sense. None of it did. She had spent so long believing that the past was just that something behind her, something she couldn't change. And now, here she was, standing in the middle of a quiet street, with the one person she had once considered her enemy, being told that everything she thought she knew was only a fraction of the truth. "I don't have time for riddles," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "If you want me to believe you, then start talking." He hesitated, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. But then, with a tired sigh, he finally spoke. "There was never just one story," he said. "What you were told, what I was told, it was only part of it. A version that someone wanted us to believe." Her hands curled into fists. "Then tell me the real story." He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. And then, finally, he did. He told her about the past, the things that had been hidden, the lies that had been fed to them for years. About how neither of them had ever been given the full picture. About how the people they trusted had been playing a game far bigger than either of them could have imagined. With every word, the foundation of everything she had believed began to crack. And then, just as the weight of it all began to sink in, the sound of approaching footsteps shattered the moment. She didn't know who they belonged to, but she didn't have to. Because in that instant, she understood one thing with absolute certainty. They were no longer just running from the past. They were running for their lives. The footsteps were getting closer. Too close. There was no time to think, only to act. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the nearest doorway. The handle wouldn't budge. Locked. A curse slipped from his lips as he scanned the area, looking for another way out. She could feel her pulse hammering in her ears, her breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts. Then, another sound. A voice. Low. Commanding. Too close for comfort. She didn't recognize it, but he did. She could see it in the way his body tensed, the flicker of something unreadable in his expression. This wasn't just some random threat. This was personal. "We have to go," he whispered, his grip tightening around her wrist. She nodded, following as he pulled her into a narrow passage between two crumbling buildings. The space was tight, barely enough for them to squeeze through, but they had no other choice. They moved quickly, the rough edges of the walls scraping against their clothes, their breath shallow as they tried to stay silent. The voices behind them grew louder, closer. She didn't need to hear what they were saying to know they were looking for them. They reached the end of the passage, emerging into another street, darker and emptier than the last. The city felt different here, quieter, more isolated. It was the kind of place where things disappeared, where people disappeared. She turned to him. "Who are they?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze flickered toward the shadows, calculating, before he finally spoke. "People who don't like loose ends." Her stomach twisted. "And we're the loose ends." His silence was answer enough. A car engine rumbled in the distance, headlights sweeping across the empty road. They ducked behind a row of rusted dumpsters just in time, the glow of the lights washing over them before disappearing into the night. She exhaled shakily. "You said this isn't just about me." "Then tell me what they want." His jaw tightened. "The truth. Or at least to make sure we never find it." That wasn't enough. She needed more. Needed to understand why she was suddenly being hunted, why everything she thought was buried was clawing its way back to the surface. But before she could press him further, the sound of a car door slamming sent a fresh wave of panic through her. They weren't alone anymore. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. The car door slammed shut, the sharp sound slicing through the quiet street like a warning. She pressed herself tighter against the cold metal of the dumpster, barely daring to breathe. He was tense beside her, his fingers curled into fists as he listened. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone was searching for them, and they weren't in a hurry. Her mind raced. If they were caught, there would be no explanations, no second chances. She had spent so much time trying to piece together the truth, but none of it would matter if they didn't make it out of here. He shifted beside her, his body coiled like he was ready to fight if it came to that. She could see it in his expression. This wasn't the first time he had been in a situation like this. But for her, it was, and the fear was suffocating. Then, without warning, the footsteps stopped. Silence. The kind that stretched too long. The kind that told her they weren't just hiding. They were being watched. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. And then, just as quickly as the silence had fallen, a voice shattered it. "You can come out now." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a demand. It was something worse. It was familiar. Her breath caught in her throat as she turned to him, her wide eyes searching his face. But the look he gave her made the blood in her veins turn to ice. He knew who it was. And worse, he had expected them. Before she could say anything, before she could even begin to process what was happening, he moved. Not to run, not to fight, but to stand. He rose slowly, his hands at his sides, every muscle in his body tight with something she couldn't quite name. Betrayal. Shock crashed through her, but she forced herself to stand, her legs shaking as she followed his lead. The moment she stepped into the dim light, her breath caught. The person standing in front of them wasn't a stranger. It was someone she had trusted, someone who had once stood by her side, someone who was supposed to be dead. And in that moment, she realized the truth. She had been chasing answers in the wrong places all along, because the real danger had never been behind her. It had been right in front of her all along. She couldn't breathe. The world around her blurred, the edges of reality bending as she struggled to process what she was seeing. The person standing before her, the one she had mourned, the one she had buried in her memories, was alive. And worse, they weren't here to save her. The betrayal settled deep in her bones, colder than the night air. Her hands clenched into fists, but she didn't know if it was from anger, fear, or the crushing weight of realization. "You're supposed to be dead," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure smirked, stepping closer, their shadows stretching across the cracked pavement. I was. Or at least, that's what you were meant to believe. She turned to him, searching his face for answers, for any sign that this wasn't what it seemed. But the look in his eyes told her everything. He had known. Maybe not everything, maybe not the details, but he had known there was more to this than she did. And he hadn't told her. "Did you plan this?" she asked, her voice shaking. His jaw tightened. No. A part of her wanted to believe him. But belief was dangerous. Belief had led her here, standing in front of someone who had already betrayed her once. The person she used to trust tilted their head, studying her like she was a puzzle missing pieces. "You were always the smart one. I wondered how long it would take for you to figure it out." She swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Figure what out?" A quiet chuckle. That this was never about what happened back then. It's about what happens next. The words sent a chill through her. This wasn't just a trap. This was a game, and she had been playing it without even knowing. She took a step back, her mind racing. There had to be a way out. A way to turn this around before it was too late. But then, before she could react, before she could even take another breath, he moved. Fast. Too fast. A gun. A flash of silver in the dim light. And then, a shot. She flinched, expecting pain. But none came. When she opened her eyes, her former ally, the one who had betrayed her, the one who had brought her here, was staring in shock, a hand pressed to their side. Blood seeped between their fingers, dark against the night. She turned to him, heart pounding. The gun was still in his hands, his expression unreadable. "It was them or us," he said quietly. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. But there was no time, because as the figure before them staggered, eyes burning with something between rage and regret, they let out a low, breathless laugh. "This isn't over," they murmured. "You think this ends with me?" And then, with one final shuddering breath, they collapsed. The silence that followed was deafening. She looked at him, her pulse racing. "What now?" He exhaled, his grip tightening around the gun. "Now?" He glanced down at the lifeless body, then back at her. "Now we find out who's really pulling the strings." A heavy silence hung between them. The body on the ground, the blood staining the pavement. It should have felt like an ending, but it wasn't. She knew that now. This wasn't over. She looked at him, waiting for an answer he couldn't give. His jaw was tight, his grip still firm around the gun, but his eyes held something else. Not victory, not relief, just the weight of everything they had done, everything they had yet to do. "We can't stay here," he said finally, his voice low. "Someone will come looking." She nodded, even though her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. They had been running for so long, chasing shadows, trying to put together a truth that had been kept from them. And now they had it. Or at least, they had enough of it to know they weren't safe. As they moved away from the body, she couldn't help but glance back one last time. There was something unsettling about it, something final, and yet the words still echoed in her mind. "You think this ends with me?" It didn't. She could feel it. They disappeared into the darkness, sticking to the back streets, avoiding the eyes of anyone who might recognize them. The city felt different now, emptier, colder. Or maybe it was just her. They found an abandoned building near the outskirts, something barely standing, but enough to give them shelter for the night. She sat on the floor, her back against the crumbling wall, and exhaled slowly. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. He ran a hand through his hair, the tension never leaving his shoulders. "We need to know who else is involved. Who gave the orders. We don't stop until we know everything." She let his words settle, staring at the dirt-covered floor. "And then what?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if the weight of her question had finally hit him. Then we decide what kind of people we want to be. For a long time, neither of them spoke. She thought back to how this had started. How she had once seen him as nothing but an enemy. How everything had changed. They had been forced together by circumstances neither of them fully understood at the time. But now, after everything, she knew one thing for certain. They were in this together. Morning came too soon, the weak sunlight barely making it through the boarded-up windows. She didn't know how long she had slept, or if she had slept at all. But when she opened her eyes, he was already awake, sitting near the door, lost in thought. "We should leave the city," he said, without looking at her. "Go somewhere they won't expect." She considered it. Running. Hiding. It made sense. But something inside her resisted the idea. "We can't keep running forever," she said. He finally turned to face her, and she saw it the same thought reflected in his expression. They were tired, both of them, but this wasn't just about survival anymore. She stood up, brushing the dust off her clothes. "We finish this. We find out who's behind it all." He studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Then we do it right." And just like that, they had made their choice. The days that followed were a blur of movement and whispers, chasing leads, putting together the final pieces of the puzzle. And when the truth finally revealed itself, it wasn't just a name on a list. It was someone who had been there all along, someone who had orchestrated everything from the very beginning. She had expected anger, maybe even relief, but all she felt was exhaustion. When the confrontation came, it wasn't loud. There were no gunshots, no last-minute escapes. Just words. Just the undeniable weight of the truth. In the end, power didn't come from secrets. It came from those willing to expose them. And that's exactly what they did. It didn't erase the past. It didn't bring back what was lost. But it gave them something else. A future. As they walked away from it all, the city behind them, she let out a slow breath. "Do you think we'll ever stop looking over our shoulders?" she asked. He glanced at her, a faint smile touching his lips. Maybe one day. She wasn't sure if she believed him. But for now, it was enough. They had survived. They had won. And for the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't feel like a trap. It felt like freedom.